Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor was never supposed to be queen. When she was born on April 21, 1926, she was third in line to the throne, behind her uncle Edward and her father Albert. Her parents, the Duke and Duchess of York, lived a relatively quiet life compared to the main royal family. Little Elizabeth spent her early years playing with her younger sister Margaret in their London home, completely unaware that destiny had other plans for her. The young princess loved horses from the moment she could walk. Her grandfather, King George V, would often find her in the palace stables talking to the horses as if they were her closest friends. She had a special gift with animals that amazed everyone around her. Even as a small child, Elizabeth showed remarkable responsibility and seriousness that seemed unusual for someone so young. Her governess, Marion Crawford, noticed that Elizabeth was different from other children her age. She would carefully arrange her toy horses in perfect lines, making sure each one was properly positioned. When playing house with Margaret, Elizabeth always insisted on following proper rules and procedures. She treated her dolls like real people, speaking to them politely, and making sure they were properly dressed. The turning point came in 1936 when Elizabeth was just 10 years old. Her uncle, King Edward VIII, made a shocking decision that changed British history forever. He chose to give up the throne to marry an American woman named Wallis Simpson. The entire country was stunned. Suddenly, Elizabeth's father became king, George VI, and she found herself next in line to rule the British Empire. The transformation was immediate and overwhelming. The family had to move from their comfortable home to Buckingham Palace, a massive building with hundreds of rooms. Elizabeth later described feeling lost in the enormous corridors, trying to find her way to different rooms. The palace staff had to adjust to having children running through the halls again, something that hadn't happened in decades. Her education changed completely. Instead of learning basic subjects like other children, Elizabeth began studying constitutional law, British history, and international relations. She had to learn about every country in the Commonwealth, understanding their cultures, governments, and relationships with Britain. French lessons became mandatory, as did instruction in proper royal protocol. The weight of her future responsibilities began to settle on her young shoulders. Elizabeth understood that her childhood would be shorter than other children's. She watched her father struggle with the unexpected burden of kingship, seeing how the stress affected his health. King George VI had never been prepared to rule and suffered from a severe stammer that made public speaking torture for him. Despite the enormous pressure, Elizabeth embraced her destiny with remarkable grace. She began attending important state functions, learning to stand for hours in formal dress, smile constantly, and make polite conversation with strangers. Her natural dignity impressed everyone who met her. Foreign dignitaries often commented on how poised and intelligent she seemed for such a young person. The princess developed an extraordinary memory for faces and names. She would spend hours before events studying photographs and briefing notes about the people she would meet. This preparation became a lifelong habit that would serve her well throughout her reign. Elizabeth understood that remembering someone's name and asking about their family or work made people feel valued and respected. Her relationship with her parents deepened during this period. King George VI began including her in important discussions about government matters. He wanted to prepare her properly for the role she would eventually inherit. The Queen Mother supported Elizabeth's education while trying to preserve some normalcy in her daughters' lives. Elizabeth's teenage years were shaped by World War II. The royal family chose to stay in London during the bombing, sharing the dangers faced by ordinary British citizens. This decision earned them tremendous respect and loyalty from the public. The young princess insisted on contributing to the war effort, despite her parents' concerns about her safety. At 18, Elizabeth convinced her father to let her join the Auxiliary Territorial Service, the women's branch of the British Army. She trained as a driver and mechanic, learning to repair engines and change tires. For the first time in her life, she worked alongside ordinary young women, sharing their experiences and forming genuine friendships. Her fellow servicewomen initially treated her with nervous respect, but Elizabeth's genuine personality and willingness to get her hands dirty quickly won them over. She insisted on sleeping in the same barracks and eating the same food as everyone else. These months gave her invaluable insight into how regular people lived and worked. The experience taught Elizabeth practical skills that amazed the palace staff. She could strip down an engine, navigate using military maps, and drive heavy vehicles through difficult terrain. These abilities would later prove useful during her many travels as queen, when she sometimes had to adapt to challenging situations in remote locations. More importantly, her military service connected her to the British people in a way that previous monarchs had never experienced. She understood the value of hard work and the satisfaction of contributing to something larger than herself. The friendships she formed with her fellow servicewomen lasted for decades, providing her with perspectives from outside the royal bubble. The love story between Elizabeth and Philip began when she was just 13 years old. They first met at the Royal Naval College in Dartmouth, where Philip was a cadet and Elizabeth was visiting with her family. While other adults engaged in formal conversations, Elizabeth found herself captivated by the tall, handsome young man who seemed so confident and charming. Philip was unlike anyone Elizabeth had ever encountered. Born as Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark, he had lived a life of adventure and uncertainty that was completely different from her structured royal upbringing. His family had been exiled from Greece when he was just a baby, and he had spent his childhood moving between different relatives across Europe. The young prince had no permanent home, no country to call his own, and very little money. He carried his few possessions in a single suitcase and had learned to adapt to new situations quickly. This nomadic lifestyle had given him a sense of independence and self-reliance that impressed Elizabeth. While she had been sheltered and protected, Philip had experienced real hardship and uncertainty. Their correspondence began innocently enough, with Philip writing amusing letters about his naval training and adventures. Elizabeth treasured these letters, reading them repeatedly and sharing funny stories with her sister Margaret. The princess found Philip's irreverent sense of humor refreshing after years of formal palace interactions. As Elizabeth entered her late teens, their relationship deepened beyond friendship. Philip's letters became more personal, describing his hopes and dreams for the future. He wrote about his love for the sea and his desire to serve his adopted country, Britain, with distinction. Elizabeth began to see past his confident exterior to the thoughtful, principled man underneath. The courtship faced enormous obstacles from the beginning. Many members of the royal family and government officials disapproved of Philip for various reasons. Some questioned his foreign birth and lack of British roots. Others worried about his family connections, particularly his German relatives who had fought against Britain during the war. Philip's personality also concerned some courtiers. He was outspoken and sometimes impatient with royal protocol. Unlike the traditionally reserved British royals, Philip expressed his opinions freely and didn't always show the deference that palace officials expected. Some worried that he might be too independent and strong-willed to support Elizabeth properly. In her future role, the young couple's determination to be together impressed even their critics. Philip made significant sacrifices to prove his commitment to Elizabeth and Britain. He gave up his Greek and Danish titles, converted from Greek Orthodoxy to the Church of England, and took his mother's British surname, Mountbatten. Most remarkably, Philip abandoned his promising naval career to support Elizabeth's destiny as queen. He had shown exceptional talent as a naval officer and could have achieved high rank and command of important ships. Instead, he chose to step back from his own ambitions to become Elizabeth's partner and supporter. The engagement announcement in July 1947 created a sensation throughout Britain and the Commonwealth. The country was still recovering from the devastating effects of World War II, and the royal wedding promised to provide a much-needed celebration and symbol of hope for the future. Elizabeth's engagement ring became the subject of intense public interest. Philip had commissioned it using diamonds from a tiara belonging to his mother, Princess Alice. The romantic gesture of transforming family heirlooms into a symbol of their love captured the public's imagination and demonstrated Philip's thoughtfulness. Despite his limited financial resources, the wedding preparations revealed the couple's desire to balance royal tradition with their personal preferences. Elizabeth insisted on including personal touches that reflected their relationship, while Philip worked to understand and adapt to royal customs that were completely foreign to his more informal upbringing. Their wedding day, November 20th, 1947, became a moment of national celebration that temporarily lifted Britain's post-war gloom. Despite rationing and economic hardship, the country embraced the fairy tale romance between their future queen and her handsome prince. The ceremony at Westminster Abbey was broadcast on radio to millions of listeners worldwide. Elizabeth's wedding, dress designed by Norman Hartnell, required special government permission because silk was still rationed. The intricate embroidery took months to complete and incorporated symbols representing the countries of the Commonwealth. Philip's transformation from rootless prince to Duke of Edinburgh symbolized the possibility of new beginnings and fresh starts. His willingness to embrace British traditions while bringing his own perspective and energy to the royal family suggested a modernization of the monarchy. Their early married life was relatively normal by royal standards. They lived in a modest apartment in Clarence House and later in Malta, where Philip resumed his naval career. Elizabeth experienced something approaching ordinary married life, managing household duties and supporting her husband's career, while gradually preparing for her future responsibilities. The couple's happiness during these early years was evident to everyone around them. Elizabeth bloomed in marriage, gaining confidence and developing a more relaxed personality. Philip's influence encouraged her to be more spontaneous and adventurous, while her steady nature provided him with the stability he had never known. Their partnership became a model of mutual support and complementary strengths. Elizabeth's careful consideration balanced Philip's quick decisions, while his boldness encouraged her to take appropriate risks. Together, they formed a team that would face the challenges of monarchy with remarkable resilience and unity. The most touching moment in Elizabeth's life came on February 6, 1952, when she became queen while sitting in a treehouse in Kenya. She and Philip were on a tour representing her ailing father when news arrived that King George VI had died peacefully in his sleep at Sandringham. At just 25 years old, Elizabeth's carefree days as a young wife and mother ended forever. The couple had been staying at Treetops, a unique hotel built in the branches of a giant fig tree overlooking a watering hole where elephants, rhinos, and other wildlife came to drink. They had spent the evening watching animals in their natural habitat, laughing and taking photographs like any young couple on vacation. Elizabeth had no idea that these would be her last hours as a private person. The news reached them through a series of desperate communications from London. First came coded messages that something serious had happened, followed by urgent requests for them to contact the palace immediately. Philip received the devastating news first, and the weight of telling Elizabeth fell on his shoulders. The moment Philip told Elizabeth that her father had died, and she was now queen, remains one of the most poignant in royal history. Witnesses described seeing the young woman's face change as the full reality of her situation hit her. The carefree princess disappeared, replaced by a monarch who understood that her personal happiness would always come second to her duty. Elizabeth's immediate reaction revealed the depth of her character. Despite her profound grief and shock, her first concern was for her mother and sister, who were dealing with their loss back in London. She insisted on cutting short their tour immediately, to return home, even though it meant leaving behind what had been a wonderful trip. The flight home became a journey of transformation. Elizabeth left Kenya as a young woman enjoying life with her husband, but she landed in London as Queen Elizabeth II, with all the weight and responsibility that title carried. The press photographed her walking down the airplane steps in a simple, black dress, her face showing the strain of grief and the burden of her new role. The most touching aspect of this transition was how Elizabeth handled her relationship with her mother during this difficult time. The former queen, now known as the Queen Mother, was devastated by the loss of her beloved husband. Elizabeth had to balance her own grief with the need to comfort her mother while simultaneously taking on the enormous responsibilities of monarchy. Elizabeth's children, Charles and Anne, were still very young when she became queen. The 3-year-old Charles couldn't understand why his mother suddenly became so busy and important, while baby Anne was too young to comprehend the change. Elizabeth struggled with the heartbreaking reality that her children would now have to share her with an entire nation and commonwealth. The new queen's dedication to duty meant sacrificing precious family time that could never be recovered. She missed bedtime stories, family dinners, and simple moments that other mothers took for granted. The weight of this sacrifice was evident in private moments, when she would hold her children a little longer or steal quiet minutes to play with them between official duties. Philip's role during this transition was both crucial and heartbreaking. He had to give up his own naval career and ambitions to support Elizabeth in her new role. The man who had been used to commanding ships and making independent decisions now had to walk 2 steps behind his wife and defer to royal protocol in everything he did. The couple's private conversations during this period must have been filled with discussions about how to maintain their marriage and family life while serving the crown. They made conscious decisions to protect their children from excessive public attention, while still preparing them for their roles as members of the royal family. Elizabeth's coronation on June 2, 1953, was both a celebration and a deeply personal moment of acceptance. As the Archbishop of Canterbury placed the crown on her head, she was making a sacred promise to serve her people for the rest of her life. The young woman who had once dreamed of a quiet family life was committing herself to a role that would define every aspect of her existence. The most moving part of the coronation ceremony was when Elizabeth took her oath. Her clear, strong voice promised to govern the people of the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Pakistan, and Ceylon according to their laws and customs. She was promising to put the needs of millions of people before her own personal desires. Behind the pageantry and celebration, Elizabeth was dealing with the profound loneliness that comes with ultimate responsibility. No matter how many advisors surrounded her, the final decisions would always be hers alone. She could never again be simply Elizabeth Windsor, wife and mother. She was now Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen of the United Kingdom and her other realms and territories. The touching nature of Elizabeth's sacrifice becomes even more apparent when considering what she gave up. She could never have the spontaneous family life she had experienced during her brief time as a naval officer's wife in Malta. Every decision, from where to live to how to raise her children, now involved considerations of state and public perception. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect was how Elizabeth maintained her sense of humor and warmth despite these enormous pressures. Those closest to her described moments when her natural personality would shine through the formal requirements of monarchy. She would make jokes during serious ceremonies or find ways to connect personally with people, despite the barriers of protocol. Elizabeth's determination to be both a good queen and a loving mother created internal conflicts that she struggled with throughout her reign. She wanted to be present for her children's important moments while also fulfilling her duties to the nation. The balance was never perfect, and the cost was often paid in private moments of regret and missed opportunities for ordinary family happiness. Queen Elizabeth II possessed an extraordinary talent that amazed world leaders and diplomats throughout her 70-year reign. She could remember personal details about thousands of people she had met, often recalling conversations from decades earlier. This remarkable ability transformed formal state occasions into genuine human connections that left lasting impressions on everyone she encountered. The Queen's Memory Palace, as palace staff privately called it, contained detailed information about heads of state, their families, their country's challenges, and even casual comments made during previous meetings. When meeting someone for the second or third time, Elizabeth would often surprise them by asking about their children's education, their recent travels, or projects they had mentioned years before. This incredible skill didn't happen by accident. Elizabeth developed a systematic approach to remembering people that began in her early years as queen. Before every event, she would spend hours studying briefing books prepared by her staff. These documents contained photographs, biographical information, and notes about previous interactions with each person she would meet. The Queen's preparation went far beyond reading basic facts. She would study the pronunciation of unfamiliar names, learn about cultural customs that might be important to her guests, and research current events in their countries. Her staff marveled at how she could absorb and retain such vast amounts of information while managing her many other responsibilities. What made Elizabeth's memory truly special was how she used it to make people feel valued and important. Foreign ambassadors often described feeling genuinely welcomed when the Queen remembered their previous conversations. She might ask about a sick family member, inquire about a building project in their capital city, or reference a cultural celebration they had mentioned during their last meeting. This personal touch became one of Elizabeth's greatest diplomatic assets. In a world of formal protocols and carefully scripted interactions, her ability to have genuine conversations based on remembered details created bonds that transcended political differences. World leaders who initially approached her with formal reserve often left feeling they had made a real friend. The Queen's memory extended beyond official meetings to include thousands of ordinary people she encountered during public engagements. She could remember meeting someone briefly at a factory opening years earlier and would ask about developments in their work or community. This ability to connect with regular citizens made her extraordinarily popular, despite the formal nature of monarchy. Elizabeth's talent for remembering faces was equally impressive. Palace security staff noted that she could identify people in crowds who had attended previous events, sometimes from considerable distances. She would often point out familiar faces to her escorts, sharing memories of where and when she had met them before. The practical benefits of the Queen's exceptional memory became evident during state visits and international negotiations. When meeting with foreign leaders, she could reference previous discussions and build upon earlier agreements. This continuity was particularly valuable because she often outlasted several generations of politicians in other countries. Her memory also helped her navigate complex family relationships within the extended royal family and aristocracy. She could keep track of marriages, births, deaths, and changing relationships among hundreds of noble families across Europe. This knowledge proved invaluable when arranging seating at state dinners or deciding on appropriate gifts and honors. Elizabeth's staff learned to rely on her memory as much as their official records. She would often correct minor errors in briefing documents or provide additional context about past events that wasn't included in written accounts. Her personal recollections frequently proved more accurate than official files. The Queen's ability to remember personal preferences of her guests became legendary among diplomatic circles. She knew which world leaders preferred tea over coffee, who had dietary restrictions, and what topics of conversation each person enjoyed most. This attention to detail made every interaction feel personally tailored, rather than generic. During Commonwealth meetings, Elizabeth's memory allowed her to maintain personal relationships with leaders from dozens of different countries over many decades. She watched children grow up to become prime ministers and could reference their parents' achievements or challenges from years past. This continuity gave her unique influence in promoting cooperation among Commonwealth nations. The emotional impact of Elizabeth's memory was perhaps most evident during memorial services and occasions of national mourning. She could share specific memories of people who had died, offering comfort to their families with personal anecdotes that no one else could provide. Her ability to recall meaningful moments made her expressions of sympathy deeply genuine and healing. Elizabeth's memory skills extended to cultural details that impressed visitors from around the world. She could discuss local customs, historical events, and cultural achievements from countries she had visited, often demonstrating knowledge that surprised even the citizens of those nations. This cultural awareness made her an effective ambassador for international understanding. The Queen's systematic approach to building relationships through memory also included keeping track of people's interests and hobbies. She might remember that someone was passionate about gardening, collected stamps, or had recently taken up painting. These personal details provided natural conversation starters that moved beyond formal pleasantries. Perhaps most remarkably, Elizabeth maintained her exceptional memory well into her 90s. Even as her mobility declined in her final years, her ability to recall faces, names, and personal details remained sharp. Staff members who worked with her for decades continued to be amazed by her capacity to remember events and people from throughout her long reign. The legacy of Elizabeth's remarkable memory extends beyond impressive personal anecdotes. Her ability to maintain genuine relationships with thousands of people contributed significantly to the stability and respect that the British monarchy enjoyed during her reign. In an age of increasing informality and decreasing deference, her personal touch made the institution of monarchy feel relevant and connected to real people's lives. Queen Elizabeth II was the only person in the United Kingdom who could drive without a license, own property without documentation, and travel abroad without a passport. These extraordinary legal privileges existed because all official documents in Britain were issued in her name and by her authority, making it impossible for her to license herself or grant herself permission to travel. The Queen's relationship with driving was particularly fascinating because she genuinely loved being behind the wheel and was an exceptionally skilled driver. Unlike many people of her generation and social status, Elizabeth learned to drive during World War II as part of her military service. She could handle everything from small cars to large trucks and military vehicles with remarkable competence. Her driving skills amazed foreign dignitaries and security officials who expected the elderly monarch to be chauffeured everywhere. Instead, Elizabeth often insisted on driving herself even in her 80s and 90s. She particularly enjoyed driving around her private estates, where she could experience a sense of freedom and normalcy that was impossible in her public life. The Queen's favorite vehicle was a Land Rover Defender, which she drove with surprising speed and confidence over rough terrain. Guests at Balmoral Castle in Scotland often found themselves gripping their seats as the Queen navigated mountain roads and forest tracks with the skill of a rally driver. Her knowledge of every path and shortcut on the estate came from decades of exploring the Highland landscape. Elizabeth's passion for driving extended beyond mere transportation. She saw it as one of the few activities where she could be completely self-reliant and independent. Behind the wheel, she didn't need protection. Officers, ladies-in-waiting, or any other staff members. The car became her private sanctuary where she could think, listen to music, or simply enjoy the scenery without interruption. The legal anomaly of the Queen's unique status created some amusing situations over the years. When stopped by police, officers who didn't recognize her, Elizabeth would calmly explain that she didn't need a license. Most officers assumed she was confused or lying until they looked more closely and realized they were speaking to the monarch whose portrait appeared on their own identification cards. International travel presented even more interesting complications. While the Queen didn't need a British passport, foreign countries still required documentation for entry. The solution was a specially created document that served the same function as a passport, but was issued by the Foreign Office rather than the Passport Office. This document was one of the most exclusive travel documents in the world. Elizabeth's property ownership situation was equally unique. All land in the United Kingdom technically belonged to the Crown, meaning she owned everything while simultaneously owning nothing in the conventional sense. Her private residences at Balmoral and Sandringham were among the few properties she owned personally, purchased by previous monarchs with private funds rather than inherited through the Crown. The Queen's legal status created interesting challenges for her staff and government officials. Simple transactions that ordinary people took for granted required special procedures and documentation when involving the monarch. Opening bank accounts, making purchases, or signing contracts all required modified processes to accommodate her unique constitutional position. Elizabeth's relationship with money was complicated by her legal status. She couldn't carry cash because all British currency bore her image and was issued in her name. The practical solution was for staff members to handle monetary transactions, though the Queen was known to occasionally borrow small amounts from family members or staff when she wanted to make personal purchases. The privilege of traveling without a passport became particularly significant during the Queen's extensive foreign travels. She visited more than 100 countries during her reign, often making multiple trips to the same nations over several decades. Her unique travel status made her welcome in places where other heads of state might face diplomatic complications. Elizabeth's driving without a license became part of her public image, particularly after several high-profile incidents where her confident driving surprised onlookers. At the age of 91, she was photographed driving Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia around Windsor Castle. demonstrating both her continued skill and her subtle diplomatic message about women's rights. The Queen's legal exemptions extended to other areas that most people never considered. She couldn't be prosecuted in her own courts, couldn't be forced to give evidence in legal proceedings, and was immune from civil lawsuits. These protections ensured that the monarchy remained above political and legal controversies that might compromise its constitutional role. Despite these extraordinary privileges, Elizabeth was careful not to abuse her unique status. She followed traffic laws, respected speed limits, and maintained her vehicles properly even though she wasn't legally required to do so. This self-discipline reflected her understanding that her behavior set an example for the nation. The Queen's relationship with rules and regulations revealed an interesting aspect of her personality. While she was exempt from many legal requirements, she often chose to follow unofficial guidelines and expectations. She understood that her unique position carried moral obligations that went beyond legal requirements. Elizabeth's driving continued to be a source of personal joy and independence well into her final years. Even when her public appearances became less frequent, she could still be seen driving around her private estates, maintaining the connection with ordinary activities that kept her grounded, despite her extraordinary circumstances. The symbolic importance of the Queen's legal exemptions extended beyond practical considerations. They represented the unique constitutional position of the monarchy in British society, standing above and apart from the institutions that governed ordinary citizens while remaining bound by informal constraints and traditions. Her ability to travel the world without the documentation required by everyone else symbolized Britain's historical role as a global power and the Commonwealth's special relationships. When Elizabeth visited Commonwealth countries, she was technically traveling within her own realms rather than making foreign visits. The legacy of Elizabeth's unique legal status will likely be remembered as one of the most fascinating aspects of constitutional monarchy. Her careful use of extraordinary privileges demonstrated how traditional institutions could function effectively in modern democratic societies through restraint, wisdom, and respect for unwritten conventions. The final fascinating truth about Queen Elizabeth II was her secret role as a master of diplomacy, who prevented numerous international crises through quiet, behind-the-scenes interventions that the public never learned about. Her 7 decades on the throne gave her unique insight into global politics and relationships with world leaders that she used to diffuse tensions and broker peace in ways that traditional diplomats could never achieve. Elizabeth's diplomatic influence came from her extraordinary longevity and consistency in an ever-changing political landscape. While presidents, prime ministers, and other leaders came and went, she remained as a constant figure who could maintain relationships across different administrations and political parties. This continuity allowed her to serve as an informal mediator when official diplomatic channels broke down. The Queen's approach to international relations was subtle and personal, rather than formal and public. She would use private conversations during state visits, personal letters to world leaders, and carefully timed invitations to resolve conflicts that might otherwise escalate into serious international incidents. Her interventions were so discreet that even many government officials were unaware of her involvement. One of Elizabeth's most significant but little-known diplomatic achievements involved her role in maintaining Commonwealth unity during periods of severe strain. When member countries faced internal conflicts or disagreements with other nations, she would often personally reach out to leaders she had known for decades, appealing to their shared history and common values. The Queen's mastery of what diplomats call soft power was unmatched by any other world figure. Her invitations to Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle carried enormous prestige that could elevate the status of smaller nations and their leaders. She used this privilege strategically to reward good behavior and encourage cooperation on international issues. Elizabeth's personal relationships with multiple generations of leaders gave her unprecedented insight into family dynamics that affected international politics. She understood how personal grudges, family traditions, and cultural sensitivities influenced policy decisions. This knowledge allowed her to craft approaches that appealed to leaders' personal motivations rather than just their political interests. The Queen's annual Christmas broadcast became an unexpected diplomatic tool that she used to send subtle messages to world leaders and international audiences. While these speeches appeared to focus on British and Commonwealth affairs, careful listeners could detect references to global issues and implicit appeals for peace and cooperation. Elizabeth's state banquets were carefully orchestrated diplomatic events where seating arrangements, menu choices, and conversation topics were designed to advance specific foreign policy objectives. She would spend hours preparing for these occasions, studying the personalities and interests of her guests to ensure productive interactions. The Queen's private correspondence with world leaders remained one of her most closely guarded secrets. These personal letters, written in her own hand, allowed her to communicate directly with heads of state without the formal constraints of official diplomatic channels. Many international crises were resolved or prevented through these private exchanges. Elizabeth's ability to remain politically neutral while exercising diplomatic influence required extraordinary skill and judgment. She had to balance her personal relationships with foreign leaders against Britain's national interests, while avoiding any appearance of interfering in domestic politics. This delicate balance was maintained through decades of practice and natural diplomatic instinct. The Queen's role as head of the Commonwealth gave her unique opportunities to influence global affairs that no other world leader possessed. Her personal involvement in Commonwealth meetings often made the difference between successful cooperation and damaging disagreements among member nations. Elizabeth's understanding of protocol and ceremony proved surprisingly valuable in international relations. She knew how to use royal traditions and pageantry to honor foreign guests in ways that strengthened diplomatic ties. A perfectly executed state visit could transform tense relationships into productive partnerships. The Queen's longevity allowed her to maintain institutional memory that proved invaluable during international negotiations. She could remind current leaders of previous agreements, successful cooperation, and the historical context behind current disputes. This perspective often helped resolve conflicts by placing them in broader historical frameworks. Elizabeth's influence extended to international organizations where her quiet support could make crucial differences. While she never held official positions in these bodies, her private endorsements and gentle pressure often encouraged cooperation and compromise among member nations. The Queen's final years revealed the full extent of her diplomatic legacy. As world leaders gathered for her funeral, many publicly acknowledged for the first time the crucial role she had played in resolving conflicts and maintaining international stability. Her death marked the end of an era of personal diplomacy that may never be replicated. Elizabeth's diplomatic methodology was based on patience, consistency, and genuine respect for different cultures and viewpoints. She understood that lasting solutions to international problems required building trust over time, rather than seeking quick fixes through public pressure or threats. The Queen's private diplomatic interventions often involved hosting informal meetings where adversaries could interact in neutral, comfortable settings. The relaxed atmosphere of royal residences, combined with Elizabeth's personal warmth and skill as a hostess, frequently led to breakthroughs that formal negotiations had failed to achieve. Her ability to maintain friendships with leaders across the political spectrum gave Elizabeth credibility as a mediator that no partisan politician could match. Dictators and Democrats alike respected her neutrality and trusted her discretion, making her an ideal intermediary for sensitive negotiations. The full scope of Queen Elizabeth II's diplomatic achievements may never be fully known, as many of her interventions were so confidential that records remain classified. However, the peaceful resolution of numerous international crises during her reign suggests that her behind-the-scenes influence was far greater than most people realized. Her legacy as a diplomatic peacemaker may ultimately prove to be as important as her role as a constitutional monarch, representing a unique form of international leadership that combined traditional authority with modern diplomatic skill.